Two of the most powerful blockchain networks on the planet just moved closer together in a way that the mainstream financial media is barely covering. And if you hold XRP, if you hold HBAR, or if you are simply paying attention to where the future of global finance is actually heading, what just happened between these two networks is something you cannot afford to ignore. The pieces of a puzzle that serious analysts have been watching for years are clicking into place right now, in real time, right in front of us. Stay with me, because this one matters more than most people realize. What is up, everyone? John OG here. Welcome back to the channel. And if this is your first time here, welcome. You found the right place. This is Crypto John OG, where we do the work, we go deep, and we talk about what is actually happening in this space with the kind of honesty and seriousness that the subject deserves. No noise, no empty hype, no screaming about price targets without context, just real research, real analysis, and real conversation about the forces that are reshaping global finance right now. That has been the standard here since day one, and today we are bringing that same energy to one of the most significant developments in the XRP and HBAR ecosystems in recent memory. Before we get into it, I have to be upfront with you the way I always am. Nothing in this video is financial advice. I am not a licensed financial advisor, investment professional, or broker of any kind. Everything you hear today is purely for educational and informational purposes only. Cryptocurrency markets are highly volatile. Prices move fast, conditions change rapidly, and there is always meaningful risk involved in any investment decision. You could lose money. Please do your own independent research, speak to a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions, and never invest more than you can afford to lose. With that said, let's get into what is really happening. To understand why this development between XRP and HBAR carries the weight that it does, you have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture that is quietly forming around both of these networks. Because what is happening here is not an isolated event. It is a chapter in a much larger story, a story about how the global financial system is being rebuilt from the inside out, and which technologies are being selected to serve as the infrastructure of that rebuilt system. Let's start with where we are right now in the evolution of global payments. The correspondent banking system that has underpinned international finance for decades is under enormous pressure. It is slow, expensive, opaque, and deeply fragmented. Trillions of dollars move across borders every single day through a network of intermediary banks that adds friction, cost, and delay at every step. Pre-funded Nostro and Vostro accounts, the pools of capital that banks park in foreign jurisdictions to facilitate cross-border settlements, tie up an estimated $27 trillion in idle capital at any given time. That is $27 trillion sitting still, doing nothing productive, just waiting to lubricate a payment system that should have been modernized a generation ago. The global financial establishment knows this. Central banks know this. The Bank for International Settlements knows this. SWIFT knows this. The International Monetary Fund knows this. And over the past several years, the quiet consensus building among these institutions has been that blockchain technology, specifically the right kind of blockchain technology, holds the key to solving this problem at scale. Not the speculative, retail-driven cryptocurrency world that most people think of when they hear the word blockchain, but the enterprise-grade, institutionally governed, regulatory-compliant blockchain infrastructure that was actually built to handle the demands of global finance. That is where XRP and HBAR enter the picture. And that is why what just happened between these two networks is so significant. Let's talk about what the XRP and HBAR partnership actually represents and why these two networks, out of all the possibilities in the crypto space, are the ones being discussed together in the context of serious institutional adoption. XRP was built with a singular, focused purpose: to serve as a bridge currency for cross-border payments. The XRP ledger processes transactions in 3 to 5 seconds at a fraction of a cent per transaction with deterministic finality, meaning once a transaction settles, it is settled, with no possibility of reversal or reorganization. That characteristic, deterministic finality, sounds technical, but it is actually one of the most important features any financial infrastructure can have. Banks moving billions of dollars across borders cannot operate on a system where settlement is probabilistic. They need certainty. XRP delivers that certainty. Hedera Hashgraph and its native token HBAR operate on a fundamentally different architecture, not a traditional blockchain but a directed acyclic graph, which allows it to achieve transaction speeds and throughput that even most blockchain networks cannot match. Hedera processes hundreds of thousands of transactions per second with the same deterministic finality that makes XRP attractive to institutional users. And beyond raw performance, Hedera brings something else that banks and enterprises find extraordinarily compelling: a governing council model that includes some of the most recognized names in global business and technology: Google, IBM, Boeing, Deutsche Telekom, LG Electronics. These are not crypto-native startups. These are established global institutions that have staked their reputations on Hedera's governance and infrastructure. When you put XRP's cross-border liquidity utility together with Hedera's enterprise-grade throughput and institutional governance, you are looking at two networks that complement each other in ways that are genuinely powerful. XRP handles the liquidity bridging and currency translation between fragmented fiat systems. HBAR provides the high-throughput governed settlement layer for the tokenization of real-world assets, private credit, bonds, real estate, and other financial instruments that are increasingly being represented on-chain. Together, they address different pieces of the same enormous problem: the modernization of global financial infrastructure. Now, let's talk about the specific developments that are driving this story right now, because the context matters as much as the relationship between the two networks. The first major piece of context is ISO 2022, the new global standard for financial messaging that SWIFT officially moved to after the legacy coexistence period ended in late 2025. ISO 2022 is not a cryptocurrency protocol. It is a data standard, a way of structuring financial messages so that different institutions and systems around the world can communicate with each other in a common language. But here is why it matters enormously for XRP and HBAR. Both networks are fully ISO 2022 compliant. They were built to speak the language of modern financial infrastructure. And as SWIFT's member banks, which represent the backbone of global interbank payments, complete their migration to ISO 2022, the door for these networks to plug directly into the global financial messaging system becomes significantly wider. The second piece of context is SWIFT's own live digital asset trials, which have been running from 2025 into 2026, specifically exploring how XRP and HBAR can bridge different central bank digital currency networks through what SWIFT describes as an interlinking solution. These are not hypothetical pilots or proof-of-concept experiments conducted in isolation. These are live trials being run by the organization that currently processes trillions of dollars in interbank messages every single day. The fact that XRP and HBAR are both at the center of those trials, not competing with each other but serving complementary functions within the same infrastructure experiment, is one of the clearest signals of institutional intent that the crypto space has ever produced. The third piece of context is the OMFIF, the Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, a network of central banks and sovereign wealth funds that collectively oversees approximately $43 trillion in assets. Recent research from OMFIF has explicitly highlighted public blockchains in the context of commercial banking and has spotlighted XRP and related networks as rails for what analysts are calling stablecoins, blockchain-native versions of existing fiat obligations. When the institution that advises the institutions managing $43 trillion in sovereign wealth starts publishing research that places your network at the center of the future financial system, that is not something you dismiss as speculation. Let's address the governance question directly because it is one of the most important nuances in this entire conversation, and it tends to get glossed over in the hype-driven corners of the crypto space. Both XRP and HBAR have faced criticism from the more ideologically pure corners of the crypto world for their governance structures. The XRP ledger's unique node list and Hedera's governing council both represent models where control is concentrated among a defined set of known entities rather than distributed across thousands of anonymous validators the way Bitcoin or Ethereum operate. Critics frame this as a retreat from the core principles of decentralization that the crypto space was built on. And that criticism is not entirely wrong. These networks do make a deliberate trade-off. They sacrifice a degree of decentralization in exchange for the institutional-grade governance, compliance infrastructure, and operational stability that regulated financial institutions require before they will move real money at scale through any system. A central bank does not move trillions of dollars through a network governed by anonymous validators. An asset manager does not custody institutional client funds on infrastructure where the rules can change based on an anonymous community vote. The governance trade-off that XRP and HBAR make is not a bug. For the specific use case of institutional financial infrastructure, it is a feature. And the institutions that are currently testing and adopting these networks understand that distinction very clearly. Let's also look at what is happening with Hedera specifically right now, because the HBAR side of this story deserves its own attention. By early 2026, more than 85% of HBAR's total supply has been released into circulation, a deliberate and significant milestone. Analysts tracking HBAR's supply dynamics have noted that this release schedule was designed to position HBAR for commodity-style classifications under global regulatory frameworks, which matters enormously for how financial institutions can legally interact with the asset. Hedera's daily active wallet counts jumped by 190% in late 2025, even during a period of broader market weakness. Transaction counts on the Hedera network now regularly rival and in some periods surpass Ethereum's. And partnerships like the multi-year agreement with McLaren Racing, which uses Hedera's infrastructure for digital collectibles and fan engagement, are driving real, measurable on-chain activity that goes beyond speculative trading volume. On top of all of that, existing spot ETF products are already reinforcing institutional demand for HBAR in ways that are quietly but meaningfully shifting the asset's market profile. Hedera is no longer a project that exists primarily in the minds of crypto enthusiasts. It is infrastructure that real enterprises, real institutions, and real financial products are being built on right now. Stepping back to look at the full picture, what you are actually witnessing with the convergence of XRP and HBAR within the emerging institutional financial infrastructure is something that the crypto space has been theorizing about for years. The idea that blockchain technology would eventually find its place, not by displacing the traditional financial system, but by being woven into its next iteration. That idea is no longer theoretical. It is operational. It is happening in Swift trials. It is happening in OMFIF research. It is happening in ISO 2022 compliance work. It is happening in Hedera's governing council meetings and in Ripple's partnership announcements. And in the quiet conversations between central banks and the technology providers they are evaluating for the infrastructure of tomorrow. For people who have been holding XRP and HBAR through the uncertainty, the volatility, and the years of waiting, the fundamental thesis that drove those decisions is being validated not in price action, but in something more durable and more meaningful. It is being validated in architecture, in the actual plumbing of the system that moves money around the world being redesigned around these networks in real time. That does not guarantee any specific price outcome. Markets are unpredictable, sentiment is volatile, and the path from here to full institutional deployment at scale will have twists and turns that nobody can fully anticipate. But the structural positioning of these two networks within the emerging global financial infrastructure is as strong as it has ever been, and that is a statement worth sitting with. For the newer viewers who are trying to figure out what all of this means practically, here is how I would frame it. Do not think about XRP and HBAR in the same category as speculative altcoins. Think about them the way you would think about infrastructure plays. Assets whose value is fundamentally tied to the adoption and utilization of the technology they power. The question is not whether these networks will hit a specific price by a specific date. The question is whether the technology they represent will become embedded in the infrastructure of global finance over the next decade. And the evidence pointing toward yes on that question is stronger today than it has ever been before. Do the research. Look at the ISO 2122 compliance work. Look at the Swift trials. Look at the OMFIF research. Look at Hedera's governing council and Ripple's institutional partnerships. Look at where the $43 trillion in sovereign wealth assets are being directed. Form your own view based on evidence, not based on price charts or YouTube hype. And whatever conclusion you reach it with your eyes open and your own mind engaged. That is going to do it for today. If this gave you a clearer and more grounded picture of what is happening between XRP and HBAR and why it matters in the context of global finance, then this video did exactly what it was meant to do. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think, what questions you have, and what developments you want me to dig into next. I read every single comment and I take them seriously. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, and make sure you are here when the next update drops, because this story is moving fast and you do not want to be behind it. This is John OG. Stay informed, stay patient, stay rational. Take care of yourselves out there. I will see you in the next one.